And for our final presentation, after a month of March Madness, we have 7 people joining us to discuss connecting the global mass timber industry. We have Christian Pfieffer, General Director of Ligna, joining us from Germany. Bigitta Schock of ETH in Zurich, Switzerland. Daryl Patterson of Lendlease, joining us from New Zealand. We also have here in person Chris Sitzenstock and Adam Marshall of Sidewalk Labs. Thomas Robinson, founder of Lever Architecture. We're in his office, Albany Yard here in Portland, Oregon. And myself, Greg Howes. Thanks for joining us as we discuss how do we connect the global mass timber industry? What are the challenges and opportunities in doing so?
Thank you everyone for a month long of March Timber Madness. This is, I think, our 34th presentation. I want to thank the presenters for making time to present and the audience watching live, and I think the far bigger audience that will watch the recorded streams when I make them available on YouTube. The topic I wanted to bring here at the end, and it's a really big topic, is like, how do we connect the mass timber industry as it evolves differently in different countries? And I want to introduce first the people we have here. We're in Albany Yards at the office of Lever Architecture with Thomas Robinson. We have Adam Marshall and Chris Sitzenstock from Sidewalk Labs, also based here in the Pacific Northwest. Of course, I'm Greg Howes, based here in the Pacific Northwest. We have Christian Pfieffer, General Director of Ligna in Germany, Bigitta Schock from Switzerland, and Daryl Patterson, who I believe of Lendlease is now in New Zealand. So we have a very international crowd, and we don't have a lot of time, but I just want to bring up that topic. How do we connect best practices, evolving technologies, so the mass timber industry can be more successful by being more aware of what's going on in other countries? And since we haven't heard much from you yet, could I begin with Bigitta, since you're a connector by definition.
Thank you so much, Greg, for that compliment. I hope so. So, how do we connect better? I just finished the last week a big conference where we brought together the Building Smart International Network, which is spread over in 25 countries, together with Switzerland's interest through a combination complete virtual summit and event. So, I mean, still, I think having this understanding, if we can share openly, and if you can discuss openly the things, this is one approach. The other approach, I think, is really, and that's my strong believing, if you have a group of 5 or 10 people, and you have something which is definitely interesting of you, so just talk to each other, be open, and start the spreading, because the best thing you can do is not putting out some posts or things like that. That's talking to people. That's definitely talking to people about what you do. And if you start to talk about what you do, then the other one will open up. So as we all know, and we have heard that in the previous discussion, Switzerland and the US seems to have a strong connection, and also Germany and Switzerland has a strong connection. And I'm quite excited about the presentation I just heard about you, Daryl, which is exactly my interest, the DFMAD. So we have some global topics. One of them is the digital twin. Another one definitely is the circularity, the circular economy question, and is the prefabrication, and this is the industrial fabrication. I think we are not so far from each other if we just focus on these huge topics, because they are all the same drivers, global drivers. So if you ask me what is the best way to connect mass timber, it's the same like all the other topics. So this is the thing I'd like to push forward, or pull, even better said, because I strongly believe that you have to get something in mind. You need to believe in something, and then you can pull together a group of people, and you can probably start an initiative like just has been done about the digital twin initiative.
Beautiful. What are the next events in Switzerland where this is happening?
Well, currently the next event it's just a week in between the last, and we are currently already in the preparation of the next. And I know, Christian, you know exactly how hard it is in today's world to bring up ferries. If you don't know, can they be physically, can they not be physically? Is it a good idea to have something in a hybrid way? So this was the reason why we decided something completely virtual. But now we are planning, well, we have now the experience and we know exactly that we can do it completely virtual, but we have a big ferry every second year in Switzerland, which is called Swissbau. Swissbau is comparable to, I think, most countries will have something similar. It's a big ferry every second year where the construction industry comes together for 1 week. So what we'd like to do is bringing the different players together at that exhibition and doing a first live hackathon during that 4 days of exhibition, taking the opportunity to have different stakeholders at the place already, because in Switzerland we are a small country, although we have 26 different cantons, 4 different languages, and definitely a huge challenge in all the regulations, because we have 196 different commons. So don't ask me about regulations, that's a big pain point we have. But the Swissbau brings together for 1 week the people. And I think this is a good opportunity to really challenge the big international topics. So, Greg, you know that you are invited. We are in the preparation of Hagendeck Hackathon, and I'm definitely sure that out of this group, I will contact in the next couple of days you again. So, yes. And we need to start, because I'm very jealous about you. I mean, I've heard a lot of the admiring of the Swiss wood construction companies and the things. This is vice versa. I admire always the US guys, because you're just doing the things sometimes. You know, you just try to do it. You're better in testing than we are. We are highly focused on quality, and believe me, timber construction in Switzerland, maybe we have good qualities, but they are all very expensive.
Great, thank you, Bigitta. We did see an earlier presentation from Kristen Pfieffer and heard about Ligna, by far the world's biggest trade fair with unbelievable amounts of innovation. And I think over 90,000 people also attend that event, but only getting 2% of your attendees to come from North America. How do we connect more of that innovation, that whole ecosystem, so more people are aware of Ligna, more people attend, but also there's just more connection internationally?
Well, for the first step, I mean, we will introduce the digital platform of Ligna, so that people who are in the Pacific Northwest, for example, can also go online and be part of the experience of Ligna. But being there in person on a 2.5 million square feet area where we are demonstrating machinery from all value-added shit in woodworking, we try to help people with guided tours, for example, with seminars to get in the connection with the networks. I mean, I'm completely with Bigitta. It's about network. It's about talking in person to people. For now, digital and virtual is a good bridge, but I think it makes a lot more sense to do this in person, being it in the Pacific Northwest or Switzerland or Germany. It's the continuous process of people talking together and developing things and moving things forward. And this surrounded by technology. I mean, this is the beauty of innovation in woodworking, and you can see that at Ligna.
I hope things evolve such that we can attend in person safely as soon as possible, and hopefully your event, again, to repeat it, Ligna, is at the end of September, early October. Correct. The next one. We'll see where the world is by that time. And then Daryl Patterson of Lendlease, you just gave a presentation and your engagement with Podium. And not only your really impressive, I think, $100 billion of projects in your pipeline, but your efforts to engage with your platform. And you're already an international company with research divisions in 4 different cities, I believe. Can you just talk a bit about how you see information spreading across borders, best practices for mass timber?
Yeah, I think what we've been talking about with the sort of formal events of the great conversation starters, you know, whether it's a trade show or it's an event like you've organised here, Greg, we know these things are super important for actually making the networks that ultimately come from them. But we also know that they take an enormous amount of effort from the people who organise them, and they take quite a bit of effort too from the part of the people who have to attend and make space in their diary for that. I think what we see is the power of informal networks that get activated by those formal events. And what we need to do more of, I think, is create opportunities for informal conversations that are perhaps less structured, but lead to more interesting opportunities as a result. You know, Chris from Sidewalk, you know, you and I have had a number of conversations over the years. We have no formal business partnership, but we from time to time can exchange ideas. And I think we need to encourage more of that informality. And it actually needs a little bit of putting something out there to get it started, because often we think, oh, look, we're competitors, or I don't want to share what I'm doing because it might have proprietary value to the business, or, you know, gee, my research effort, you know, I'm competing with something that's happening at ETH Zurich. I don't want to be exposing that. But I think the real value does come from saying, look, we will host a, you know, whether it's online or in a coffee shop, we'll just host a free-for-all conversation on a regular basis, and all comers can roll up and exchange ideas. And that leads to business opportunities. It leads to innovation. It leads to things that would never otherwise have happened. And that's why we've put our doors open in our 4 research centres to say, we have to work with the supply chain. We don't have all the ideas. We've got very few of them, right? We have some ideas about building some of the sort of infrastructure to bring people together, but we have no ideas about how to make the best facade in the world, or the next generation of HVAC systems, for example.
Yeah, no, I mean, I would like sort of second what Daryl said, because to me there's sort of an informal network that needs to occur, and like to me like that almost needs to be curated by us with the next generation, because in a way like Daryl has my email, like he has my phone number, like we can talk pretty easily, but like do the 5 people who work for Daryl and the 5 people who work for me connect? You know, and really like that would be the magic thing, you know, and like to make that happen, and like who are the next 5 Thomas Robbins, I think those people, who are the next 5 Gregs, you know, like, I mean, like, to me, like that's the real thing that will like connect things, you know, and like be more youthful and have better ideas than us, hopefully.
No, that's a really good point. I mean, you know, we have 36 people, and you know, I wish I got to work on every project and get into the details, but there's definitely people that they do all day and day out, which is really working on the next thing. So it's exciting, you know, in a way. I feel like the last 5 years we've had our heads down, you know, I don't know, so many projects, and I don't know, it's like 10 projects or something crazy. And it's nice to sort of reemerge and, you know, say, oh, we can connect and learn. You know, when you're in the thick of it, sometimes just as an architect, it's very consuming, you know. So it's, you know, I really enjoy the opportunities I've gotten to actually go to like, you know, Norway, or, you know, about just giving lectures, because it actually takes me out of my world, which is in a way very consuming. If you actually really are interested in executing buildings, it's just because this is the part that I love, is actually the kind of putting the pieces together, but it's almost the piece that is probably the easiest. Honestly, I know you guys might not think that, but and the most fun in a way. And you know, it's like, you know, we got a high-rise building permitted in the US and did all the testing and all that. And that was not the hard part. The hard part was the collapse of like low-income housing tax credits, you know, based on politics. That was the hard part. We spent more time dealing with that than doing post-tension rocky wall systems. So I think it's just that, you know, I think that bigger piece, you know, thinking about how to adapt systems to the realities of regulations, and that Lendlease is, you know, has done a pretty amazing job locally in that department. And I'm sure we could all learn from that. It's just, you need that, you really need that adaptability and flexibility. Because, you know, like one thing could take a project and turn it upside down. Like one little regulation in a building can literally kill a project. I don't know if that's true in like other industries quite as much as building, you know, because of the overlapping pieces to it. So yeah, Daryl, your comments about the informal network is really great.
Yeah, and I guess the reason I organized this event originally is that it was a kind of conference I wanted to go to. It's an opportunity to speak with amazing speakers. I want those networks, and then why not distribute that information for free on YouTube with the speaker's permission? Because to me, that's elevating the conversation. And there's so much innovation in the world. I've been fortunate enough to go help organize 45 AEC hackathons in 30 cities in 10 countries. And with a Swiss business partner and a wife from Finland, I'm fortunate I get to go to Europe quite frequently for innovation-focused events. And I see so many amazing things, but they travel really slowly across borders. There's too much reinventing the wheel. And I know that it's a competitive market, but at the same time, why don't we use the best tools? If someone has already solved that problem in that economy, can't we apply it here? And our focus is the West Coast. We're sitting here in Portland, Oregon. We have there's 50 million people on the US West Coast, Washington, Oregon, and California. And the shortage of housing units numbers in the millions. So the demand is there. We need the housing. How do we deliver that? How do we identify best tools and processes to do that? And how do we identify partners willing and able to use those new technologies? So to me, that openness isn't, although people maybe want to protect proprietary things, I think a bigger advantage is an openness to connecting so you can find those partners. That may be too idealistic. I mean, what are your views?
One thing I found is, you know, openness to adopt ideas, you know, from other industries. You know, as I mentioned, I'm coming from an aerospace background, and you know, aerospace is very insular. Like you went to the best in class aerospace supply chain. You always look for the best at making the aerospace widget. And I remember on one project, I was working on some tooling. Just by chance, we went to a roller coaster manufacturer, and the roller coaster manufacturer was best in class at being able to bend steel tubing, large steel tubing, which would be like big diameter. And so the process knowledge and similarities and overlaps that you need to build up and change the industry, evolve the industry, might not be just from the best in class in construction or best in class in architecture. You know, building that formal and informal network into other industries could also be a way to start to grow and change. And I know we've talked a lot about technology's influence, but there are also, whether that's through capital or whether that's through ideas like, you know, agile and product management and how to develop technology, there are obviously very, very common processes and methods that exist in other industries that can be brought from as well. You know, aerospace is, especially commercial aerospace, is a highly regulated, safety-driven industry that, you know, has found ways, whether it's through, you know, test-driven design or allowable-based design, to have a common set of systems that can be used again and again. And again, it's not exactly, you said, exactly the same analogy, but there definitely are things that we can learn and borrow from, and need to make sure that our networks are not, you know, in that insular way in the industry as it has evolved and existed so far.
Yeah, I would echo that. I think Adam's point's absolutely the right one. There's a transference, not just between regions, not just what's happening in Europe to the US or elsewhere. We've actually got to do this cross-industry transference. And you know, one of the things we've been doing is we're hiring for MX Studio is we're bringing people deliberately from outside the AEC industry. We've had people come from aerospace, but And my most recent hire is a head in Singapore who's come from 15 years of manufacturing in the medical industry. So, you know, what he knows about, you know, systems of production that our industry's never seen. All right, he can talk about technologies that we just have zero understanding of, but maybe that's going to be a new solution set for us in building services and how we move air and fluid around in buildings using different technologies.
I've got a few questions. One is from Steve Marshall, one of our earlier speakers. He's like, Greg, thank you so much for putting this important conversation together. I am thrilled with the podium where Daryl shared, but I'm really concerned that until we start addressing the zoning, permitting, and related issues Thomas has pointed out, we will be held back in North America. We have made baby steps with peer-to-peer exposure for approving officials, but that will not hit the scale needed. Any thoughts on how to hit a compatible open source scale model in the realm of approvals? Anyone want to see how?
I mean, like things like podium are actually like highly valuable to that. I mean, I think from like a political point of view, it's really easy for someone on the city council, a mayor or a governor to hear a lot of complaining about I couldn't get my building done, but doesn't actually have kind of like a, you know, kind of like an analytic source to see actually what happened. Okay, like here's a market that took buildings all 12 to 18 months to go through permitting, and here's the data across 10 different projects. Like, what is the goal, and you know, like, and like how do we get there? And then like sort of like, what do you actually help with that?
It's actually, how do we bring scale to approval? Because if the problem is bad, like in Seattle right now in that market, the time for the permitting process is growing exponentially, and much of that is attributable to COVID, but it certainly isn't making housing more affordable or innovation more acceptable. Out of my realm, certainly the approval.
I mean, I think like companies like Lendlease or Sidewalk should really potentially look at, you know, having building officials or ex-building officials hire them to be part of these teams to really start to kind of, you know, whenever we do a mass timber project, we don't start with a mass timber, we start with the code classification, and we tune everything. We say, hey, you want to do that project? If you go down this road, you're probably not going to get hit by a truck. If you go down this road, you know, this is a proven road. You almost have to start in a way from that. And we see so many projects like, yeah, we're going to build this huge high rise in San Francisco. And I'm like, and I would, like, maybe not, you know, not yet. You know, I mean, because we've been through that. We understand where the kind of the officials are sitting, though I think it's changing. And, you know, you'll see, you know, what's happening in Milwaukee. It's a 25-story high-rise wood building happening in Milwaukee. But I do think that has come. They've used the same fire engineer that we used on framework. So they have all the research and fire modeling that we've done for that project that they could present to the building officials there. You know, so it's like that incremental effort. But there was, you know, a 300-page fire report that was done for framework, you know, on the history of wood and fire. And I feel like those kinds of, you know, that level of documentation, and then putting it into terms that building officials can kind of understand, and working on that network is probably as critical to the success of those types of, you know, systems as necessarily the technical kind of pieces, because, you know, we're pretty knowledgeable on the technical stuff already. You know, we've done a lot, and I think we're even getting to the point where in our recent projects, you know, we're almost eliminating on our GS project, there's no steel in our connections because it's all just gravity fit with precast. You know, there's no machining. You could just build the whole thing with a saw and a forming, you know, and a form. So I think that's what sort of, that's the way we've had to go to make things simpler to work with the supply chain. But I think there's going to be points where, you know, you're going to get down to doing mass timber buildings where there's like no steel in the connections. It's just all simple cuts and machining. And we're seeing that on some new projects here too, where there is no, the screws and things like that. So I'm getting off topic. It's really about the regulations, but to do those innovations, you need that conversation to happen with those people.
Well, certainly that's an argument for even people, perceived competitors in the industry, to be talking to one another, because we all have a shared interest in regulation being more innovation friendly or change friendly, if I can put it that way. So formal and informal engagement. I want to cover a couple more questions. There's a attendee. Southeast Asia is home to some of the fastest growing timber species worldwide. How do you see mass timber industry growing in Asia?
We do a bit of work in Southeast Asia, obviously. There's probably two different parts to that question. One is, is there an industry that's growing trees and making them into a value-added product? And there certainly can be. And then the second part to it is there a utilization opportunity for that product locally, which is of course what we'd like to see with issues around logistics and carbon footprint. I think if you actually examine where most of the work's happened in the world with mass timber, it's in the temperate zones, right? It's not in the tropics or the subtropics. And we did a lot of work in research 4 or 5 years ago to understand if we could take timber systems up into the tropics. And you could, but it's extremely high risk, right? You need to be very, very good at designing for your, hydrothermal performance through your walls, or you'll end up with permanent condensation points within the timber systems. So it's an approach with caution issue. We did a lot of work, for example, with the Singapore government over a several-year period where they've actually bought mass timber into their building code now. They started off from a blanket no, and they now support it. But it does need to be treated with the utmost caution in terms of these climates. That said, I do think there is tremendous opportunity. It's starting to appear in, of all places like Papua New Guinea, where they do have a variety of species that are suitable for manufacture, and they do have a housing demand, as most places do. And I think we will see, not just in Southeast Asia, but across the Pacific, a slow uptake of more of these systems, because they offer other advantages, right? You can get cyclone proofing, for example, quite readily from a mass timber structure that no stick structure is ever going to get near. Yeah.
Thank you. A question from Lech Muzinski, another one of our presenters in this series. He asked, with the scale of mass timber building industries being still very small compared to other technologies and the seemingly strong appetite for mass timber buildings worldwide, is there much of a competitive pressure in the industry interfering with the free exchange of information, pushing the entire industry ahead? And it is not going to make a measurable dent in steel or concrete anytime soon. First of all, I want to answer the last question. I think there's just so much demand for buildings right now. There's plenty of room for steel, concrete, and wood, and almost every building is a hybrid. So I don't think that's the concern, but what do you think about the free exchange of information? Is that a constraint? I think many people address there should be more sharing, but will there realistically?
Yeah, I think there's maybe a little bit of that. I think the bigger issue is everybody's making a different product and promoting a different way of using it, and we haven't actually settled into any industry norms. And they'll probably happen, but what's the best approach? Do you use glulam beams? Do you have a point supported system? Do you use CLT walls and go load bearing? And then everybody's got a slightly different product in their catalog. And I guess this is partly what we're trying to tackle, to say, well, how do you have a system of building a mass timber building as opposed to parts, pieces, and materials that then someone's got to, someone at Thomas's team's got to rack their head around for many months to make it all work. And the moment you've got it working with one supplier, you go, yeah, I can't really go to this other supplier because their product's not quite the same. And, I think there's going to be some coalescing there. Well, there needs to be. Otherwise, we're going to see, too many small players trying to compete with each other.
I actually agree exactly with that, and I think there's also something which we should keep in mind. We often talk still about the project, and so we keep our project safe, but I rather think we should think about product platform technology, which could help. I think this is, Daryl, what I understood in your presentation right now. It's more like the Lego system based on one pixel, and then you can add on your components you like, you know. And this is also going along because you show the process, which might be easily adapted to restriction and regulations, because you are based on the process rather than on the permission phases. So I strongly believe this is what we also are facing in our network from Building Smart. And this is also the reason why I've read a proposal within Building Smart a couple of years ago. It was not the momentum there, but it seems now to come. It's definitely about the discussion having product platforms.
No, I mean, like, we work in a hard industry to like exchange information and get to know one another easily. You know, and like generally, like you do that by doing projects. You know, like I mean, I think like Sidewalk Labs has like a knowledge of how Lendlease works because we, you know, did a project for a while, and then you sort of gained a lot of information. But there's not a similar platform where you just know how people work, or you know, like what their technology is without, you know, being part of a project together. So I mean, maybe it's almost like a platform problem.
Yeah, I think it's especially a problem in a big market like this one, because often teams working on projects are new teams that have never worked together. And people change jobs frequently. That's just the nature of our construction industry. So there isn't, compared to a smaller country, it's a different problem. But I have a question both for the panelists and for the audience going forward. How do we grow the demand and knowledge about building systems, mass timber, and industrialized construction? Because it's still a niche market. So for people who are curious about it, how do they learn about it? And then the other thing is, some of us are fortunate, certainly I am, to get to go to international events. But what happens between the events? How is information shared? How do people network? What do they use to connect? And I think in new ways. I mean, I watch industries like gaming, like literally video game. My wife works in video gaming, or I'll go to a gaming conference living in San Francisco, and it's people are used to working with and even developing businesses with people they'll never physically meet. That's the norm. And how do we make information flow more and people connect more easily in the building industry and even internationally? I don't have the answer to that, but I want to be a part of that. I don't know what those systems will look like. I don't know where they will live, but certainly I want to have resources that I can tap into so I can keep current with relevant technologies, and I can find other people who are also moving in the same direction. Any suggestions?
One of the things I've said to groups before, one of the best things about our industry is it's project-based, because projects are a great way of throwing people together to do a complex thing. But one of the worst things about our industry is it's project-based, right? Because we get completely absorbed in the project. We don't have any bandwidth to go somewhere else. And then project teams never travel from one project to the next intact. It's always a new team. And in some senses, you get a little bit of dissemination through that, you know, dispersal and reforming of teams, but mainly you don't, because people just start from the blank sheet of paper again when they come together. And we've really got, I think your point is, Greg, we've really got to start introducing some ways of communicating that are nothing to do with projects, right? Because the project model is the project model. It's not going to change in the short term. And having spent 25 years in the construction and development industry, and then the last 4 or 5 years in technology, to your point, I see exactly that. I see people who communicate in real time with a wide network of peers, not on a project, but just because, hey, you know something about that technology, can you help me do this? And they're just communicating in whatever their system of choice is, whether it's Slack or something else. And it's just a live, dynamic conversation and a free flow of help. idea starters, and you know, I just don't think we have that, and we haven't even tried to have that. We're just so bound up in the project construct.
I think maybe it'll be demand-based if when tools evolve where people want housing and buildings or want to be a part of communities, and they come to the construction industry and they don't have good ways to communicate with the construction industry, but they're a very big market. Maybe in that sense it's demand-driven. I'll give you one example. When living in San Francisco, I went to the Game Developers Conference in the Moscone Center, and it's followed a couple of months later by the Builders Conference out there, Pacific Builders Conference. And I remember 15 years ago talking to game developers, and amazing stuff, as we know, all 3D and simulation. And the gamer asked me, he said, "Why is a builder here? What are you doing here?" I'm like, "Well, why don't we simulate everything using gaming technologies and teach architecture in 3D and do all of this and market our buildings this way?" And the gamer replies, "Well, that's such an obvious market. I'm sure all builders do that everywhere." And just that level of cultural difference, I'm like, nah, not quite yet. We've got a ways to go. So in that sense, it's not a technology problem. It's just such a cultural gap.
And to me, like the North American market is not mature enough to have like traditions for people to connect that way. You know, like if you go to visit like a modular producer like in Switzerland, you might be having a giant fondue with schnapps that night, where like everyone's gonna get together and that happens. You know, there's no sort of thing like that here in a way. You know, where like there's sort of that normal thing, people get together post-project or not on a project, but still connects people.
Maybe that's what we've got to create.
I mean, I think
Exactly, I agree.
yeah.
So probably you have to think about how we can create such a thing, you know, just maybe, well, that's what we start to do, using a kind of gamification approach to bring the things together, because it could be fun to share, but we are not thinking it's fun, it's just competition. So that's what we should maybe think about. How can we turn it in sharing is fun and competition is maybe later.
Yeah, I would also say is like, I think architects have that a little bit just because of the organization, you know, that they have. There is a sharing across between groups, and I do think that, you know, there could be something more specific to this type of, you know, technology-based construction. You know what I mean? In mass timber, it's starting. I mean, I think Greg's done great to start that. You know, I do feel like the idea of this open source, I really liked what Daryl was talking about, like the USB as an idea. The amount of time, I would say, like I said, our biggest challenge sometimes in doing the whole thing is where the two things come together. It's like you've got all these pieces, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, damn, can't fit this in this thing. You know, whether that's a code thing, whether it's a fire issue, whether it's like the connection, and then you end up with these sort of kludge kind of band-aids to try to put these things together. And I just think that it's like that point of connection. And I think that's true. Like, I think what Daryl really pointed out, which I thought was really interesting, is like you have to change the model of how the construction industry actually thinks about building to actually change the way we build. You know, you can't use the, you know, I think that's one thing we've noticed is like, we sometimes, at least since Lever started, you know, Lever was literally about leverage. You know, that was the idea, and thinking of architecture more as a tool. But if you started with the material and the constraints that you might actually result in a kind of better product at a specific price point. You know, so that's, I don't know, that's something that I think a lot of people are doing, you know, and all the ideas of circularity and, you know, really starting almost at the end, as you're thinking about the idea at the beginning, is always been, you know, kind of inspiration for me. And I think that even goes back to like, Leonardo da Vinci has this great quote, you know, it's like, think well to the end, begin with the end in mind. which I think is really relevant to this idea of building with the pieces in mind. And I think it's also, you know, in Oregon, like I've always been really inspired by cooks. Because they you know, they think they find the ingredient, you know, and they're like, how am I going to make this amazing thing with this amazing ingredient, you know, and I think that architects can think, or builders in general can think more from an ingredients model, which I think is very connected to timber, you know, because it is a natural living thing that is grown. It's more like an ingredient than maybe other materials. So anyways, those are things to kind of ponder. But thanks Craig, for organizing this.
Yeah, and I want to leave everyone with just this thought or proposal. When we have our AEC hackathons in Denmark, we've had 2 of them, and they're at an organization called Blocks Hub that has 500 desks, and it's the whole building and the ecosystem is dedicated to collaborative innovation in sustainability. And it's just amazing to go to that. It's the Center for Academic Research and Architecture. We go to that event, have amazing events, and then they ask me, hey, Greg, if I get on an airplane right now and I get off in San Francisco or Seattle or Portland, and I want to go to the equivalent Housing Innovation Center there, where is it? And I unfortunately, doesn't really exist. I mean, yes, there is all the amazing research at Stanford and at Pfieffer. UC Berkeley has a housing innovation lab that's beginning, but here in the Pacific Northwest, there's not really a significant one that I'm aware of. So, and I want to be a part of that. I want to be a part of, and I think many people do, a mass timber innovation in an industrialized construction hub, at least to connect with the other people. Then how do we connect with the Blocks Hub? How do we connect with ETH and DFAB and Ligna? So I think that almost has to happen virtually by people opting in to do it, to be a part of that network rather than waiting for the physical structure to exist. I wish it existed, but if it did exist, I think it would also be easier to get support from the tech industry that's pled to carbon neutrality, that is probably the biggest customer for mass timber. They're building all the campuses. They're allocating a lot of resources to housing, but those worlds aren't converging enough yet. Housing, innovation, and technology, and certainly one of the hubs should be here on the West Coast. And I propose Oregon. Anyway, welcome all your ideas. Thank you everyone for attending the whole month. All of these videos, I'll try to have time, will be up on YouTube, hopefully the next 48 hours. And the goal is to connect to all of you, promote you, and add more videos on an ongoing basis. So thank you all for participating, and we'll be in touch, and please send me your ideas. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Greg. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg.
Bye-bye for doing it.